city lifestyles.
Shall I go ahead? Okay, thank you, Radhika. Since this is such a small session, please ask questions throughout. I think we should. You guys are effectively on the panel, so that's fine. Just to introduce the panel, this is Natasha. You might probably know her from MasterChef. I think it was last season, right? She got out on a risotto dish, I think. And then she also runs actually a very cool food blog, which you should check out, kitchencat.com.au. And you should check it out because she lives in Sri Lanka now. So she covers Sri Lankan restaurants. So I think she's going to get into some Sri Lankan cuisine also. But very good photography and very good food. And this is Linda Speldewinde, who I hope you probably know. She's been a pioneer in terms of design in Sri Lanka. She started AOD 14 years ago. Sorry. And just recently they've started fashionmarket.lk, which you should definitely check out. They have very good saris. But she's done a lot towards also with the Sri Lanka Design Festival, she's done a lot towards bringing design to people and educating the next generation of designers and making it cool for parents to let their kids be designers. So the topic today is, I didn't actually understand the paragraph, but I simplified it as what is the Colombo lifestyle and where is it going? So we have two perspectives on that. Linda's a Colombo insider and Natasha's, I guess, an outsider in the best way. So my first question is, who defines what the urban lifestyle is in Colombo? Is it young people? Is it rich people? When we say lifestyle, what does that term mean?
I've been here for just under 6 months now, and I think the sort of expat lifestyle that we have is really different to the Colombo lifestyle, and I've been trying really hard to find the Colombo lifestyle. And how I do this is I go on social media and search hashtag Sri Lanka and see what local people are doing, and I find that they're eating out. They like to share the more vintage parts of Sri Lanka. The guy in the corner that sells coconuts, or this little sort of cutter in the wall that, there's a couple of those, but I'm not even sure what being a Colomboite is.
So Linda, what would the typical AOD student be like? What's their lifestyle?
Well, I guess I'd like to think that the young professional, the AOD kind of young person, is really going to be the one who is going to define Colombo's lifestyle in the future. Because I think they are well-traveled, they are tech-savvy, they have a very aspirational view about what Sri Lanka should be. They are educated. Obviously the AOD, I guess the AOD young graduate who is between 16 to 23, they have a very strong worldview about what Sri Lankan lifestyle should be. They are very, very opinionated to a great extent. So for me, I'd like to think the kind of AOD person or the young professional should be the one really who should be defining Colombo's lifestyle.
And Natasha, when you meet young people here, do you find that they share a similar sort of lifestyle to people in Canberra or people in Malaysia or people in Australia in general?
Yeah, I think so Colombo's Canberra and Colombo share a lot of things. We're kind of small town, we're small community, we talk about places, we hear about places before we read about them because word of mouth spreads so quickly. And it's very much like that here. I think even before Yamu, we wouldn't know half the good places to eat in Colombo because people would tell their friends and their friends, but it would never make it all the way to us, the newbies that have come to Colombo. So that's a good example of how the lifestyle and how social media and internet is changing that. But I think there are lots of parallels in the small town, and I think Colombo even the previous people who were here before us said Colombo when they left was a really different city to Colombo when they first arrived. And in the space of 3 years, how it's grown and developed, is very interesting to watch. And we've got quite a nice view out over the city skyline. And just, I think for us to see that in what it's going to change into in the next 6 months and 12 months and 2.5 years from now will be really interesting. But I think it's growing far quicker than I think anyone could could really have predicted 5 or 10 years ago.
Linda, I'd like to ask you a question about class, because where we are right now, if you go south of here, there's like a certain class of people who like have cars, who maybe commute from the suburbs. But if you go north of here, there's a more sort of Tamil, Muslim, essentially poorer population, which people in Colombo South don't really like think about. So do you need to have a certain income level to experience what we consider urban lifestyle?
Yeah, I think the way at the moment urban lifestyle has been defined, it's very aspirational, the way it's defined. So you almost feel that you need money to enjoy this urban lifestyle. But I am a strong believer that it really needs to be democratic, the urban lifestyle that we are developing in Sri Lanka, and it can't leave anybody out. So I think, for example, I'm a fan of what you're doing with Yamu, right? Basically, you have the roti cart next to, you can also enjoy the roti cart, as well as you can enjoy, the lounge and go have cocktails in the evening. So I think it's this whole cultural dynamism that's actually going to, like, I wish that Sri Lanka would embrace, because like you say, I mean, with AOD, we are working across the island, from the north to the south to, like yesterday I was in Dulapitiya, in one of the villages, which does handloom weaving, which we the modern design we are creating, we engage with the handloom weavers. So it's this whole mix. Now, right now I'm wearing a Parapepe jeans with a top that's been woven in this village, designed by a young Sri Lankan designer, who wants to bring in neon colors into handloom. So basically it's this whole quirky mix that engages everybody, I think. And like from the north to the south, like you say, it can't be only about, the lifestyle can't be only for people who have money. And just to wrap it up, actually, on that particular topic, I think you can also enjoy the way Colombo lifestyle has been done at the moment. You can walk down Viharamadevi Park, or the golf is green, or just walk into Good Market if you have no money, or just do some window shopping at the arcade. So that's one way without money. The other is you'll have to go and spend some money going out, the way it's been positioned, going out, having drinks, going over weekends, traveling. So that you need money for. So I think we've got to find this good balance where, you have a nice mix that's suitable for our country, because we can't alienate like majority of our Sri Lankans. It has to be a democratic thing that we build, is my personal view on it.
No, I think I agree completely. Another thing I'd like to talk about that sort of divides the city is gender. And then I guess you both could talk about that. But maybe, Natasha, you could tell me, there's a survey coming out which says that 90% of women on buses experience harassment of some sort. To be honest, from people I know, I'd say it's closer to 100%. But how do you think that affects street culture if women aren't, like where I live, my wife can't walk to the grocery store without someone like hollering at her, which means I have to always go to the grocery store. But how do you think gender affects how people experience a city, or the relative safety of the different genders?
I'm, like I said, still very new to Colombo, so I can't tell if when people are beeping their horn at me, whether they're saying, get out of the way, or whether they're saying, hey, get out. So, I'm really naive, and I will still walk everywhere and get in tuk-tuks at 1 in the morning, and I'm told this is a really bad thing. But maybe we live in a bubble where we think I feel like, we in the inner city, I feel safe, and it's maybe because I have, a really naive view, or whether I believe that people are good, but I have never felt unsafe in Colombo. And I know that's probably not the reality for most women that live here, but I will still, walk down the street and I won't even really think twice about it. That said, I haven't been on a bus, and I can understand that it's, probably quite a frustrating and experience if you need to get somewhere, and you need to get somewhere in a cheap way, in a way that's easily accessible, how that would feel. But my experience is that I've never really felt, I feel that in Australia, actually, I've been more catcalled at and objectified than I have been in Colombo.
Really?
Which, is not casting Australia in a particularly good light. But if you walk down a street at night in Australia, I think you get far more attention than you would walking down the street in Colombo at night.
So I guess the experience is bad for women everywhere.
Yeah.
But you were talking about the expat experience. So do you feel like you live in like a different sort of Colombo than, I guess, Sri Lankans?
Absolutely. I feel like we live in what we call the expat bubble. What we see is really different to what everyday Sri Lankans see. And I really wish that it could be closer. I'm really trying to find where the local Sri Lankans eat. I really want to find, I want to know what they eat. I want to know what they do. I want to know what the cultural experience is. Indi was just telling me that at night the local cinemas show softcore porn. This is new. I did not know this.
The Rio, not like Majestic. Yeah.
I'll be like, what? Where's all the porn, man? I came to the
And
porn.
it's during the day. It's at like 10 in the morning. You can go and watch like, softcore porn. Yeah.
Well, after this. But Indi was saying they dub over it. They cut plot lines together. So that's another Colombo cultural experience that I have to take myself out of the expat bubble for. But the food was, so I got here and I was like, people told me Sri Lankan food was good, I can't find it. So what's the big secret about Sri Lankan food is that it's in people's houses. People don't go out to eat Sri Lankan food because that's what they have every day. To see that glamorized a little bit more. I want to see the traditional made a bit more sexy and a bit more interesting for people to see.
So Linda, you've been making the traditional sexy in terms of fashion. I mean, if you guys should definitely check out Fashion Market. They do fascinating stuff because they take fabrics, they take materials from local designers, and you combine it with designers from Colombo, right? And so they come up with, like Pepe jeans and like a village top. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting mix. But people are doing that you're doing that with fashion. But do you see people doing that with food?
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, I think we are working on a blank canvas in Sri Lanka. So we've got the luxury, I would say, like in the West, to a certain extent, they abandoned their traditions and all of that, and they went and embraced the new bling, if you like. And now they are going back to heritage and all of that, and doing a nice mix, modern design and heritage. But we've got the opportunity to do it because we are having a blank canvas. So I feel what we are doing, it's not only the new Sri Lankan style we are building is not only about fashion. Fashion is just a part of it, the domain that I operate in. But it's also about food, like you said, just eating at home, the traditional Sri Lankan food. It's all part of the Sri Lankan lifestyle, that whole authentic experience. And any tourist or anyone coming here should be able to view that. So we shouldn't abandon everything and embrace, like I said, there is the roti cart, as well as there is the fast food, there's Sri Lankan street food, as well as you have the fast food from the West. So what do you really embrace? So if you're building a new, that's why I said this young professional we are putting out needs to know to do the right balance. They shouldn't abandon the Sri Lankan street food and just go for the Western junk food. Right? So it's that whole balance, then bringing the whole, food from home, all of that into the forefront. So it's all about, like in my opinion, we've done that very well with fashion. I just launched, I'm an entrepreneur, so we just launched fashionmarket.lk, Sri Lanka's first e-commerce platform, totally in fashion, dedicated to design and made in Sri Lanka. And that's really, you have the weaver maybe in the middle of the hill capital, in Matale or somewhere, weaving a textile taken by a modern Sri Lankan designer and bought, which you can just buy online. So it's that whole mix of, the whole new Sri Lankan style. So I think food and what you're doing at Yamu, bringing some of the street food into the, into the front line, all of that will definitely be food, fashion, the way we live, all of that should be part of this new Sri Lankan style that we are developing is my view.
I mean, there's one comment I'd like to make about that sort of thing. Like for Yamu, we started doing singular reviews like a few weeks ago, and someone commented and said, "Oh, you're like cheapening the thing," or like you're like, "Don't you have a certain reputation to maintain," and so on. And in terms of like say fashion, there's certain places in Colombo that you can't get in without shoes, actually most places, right? And it's like a hot country to wear shoes in. And there's certain places you get kicked out for wearing sarong. So the young professionals you're talking about actually have a bit of a struggle to go through, because I think when a lot of older people think about development, they think of it in like Western terms. So development means you're wearing shoes, you're wearing pants, you're eating with a fork and a knife. But I mean, having lived abroad, Natasha, like, what do you think, is there a lifestyle that isn't necessarily Western?
Maybe because of our colonial roots, I lived in Malaysia, and then, now that I'm living here, the Western way is always sort of glamorized and then rebelled against, and then, it comes in and out of fashion. But I like, back along the vein of making the traditional sexy, people should not feel like they have to dress a certain way, or it's, for example, like, when you walk into a particular kind of store and you know that they're not even going to look at you unless you dress a certain way or wear makeup, or you're not going to get the salesperson's attention, whether that's in a Western city or whether that's here. But the notion to me that you have to wear shoes or you can't wear a sarong, which is perfectly acceptable in lots of places, is quite ridiculous. But Sri Lankans are fiercely passionate, and it's because of all the hardship and the war that's happened over the last however many decades. And I want to see them also get passionate about defending their own cultures, about saying we eat with our hands and we eat at a communal table, and this is what we do, and I will wear a sarong if I freaking bloody well want to, and no one has the right to tell me that I will be refused service, because I believe in my culture and where I come from, I guess.
Now, if you guys have any questions at any point, please step in, because I'm running out. But
we were actually just going to put all the chairs in a circle and have it like in, like a big food meeting, but...
Yeah, I think, what was your name from the FT? Shan. You were talking about something called, what was that word you used to describe like how, you were talking about like how, like on Instagram people are doing, what's it, like food is social, but then with Instagram it becomes...
Yeah, I said, food has always historically been inherently social, but now it's sort of become performative on top of social. Okay,
so yeah, we could talk about maybe like what being performative social is like. You talked about like how people aren't really Instagramming like pictures of like Sri Lankan food, but then how do you Instagram like curry, right? Or like
it's not just curry, but so when I go look up on social media Sri Lanka or Sri Lankan food, I get a lot of tourist posts, and it'll be like, I had hoppers today, and I'm like, where are the locals saying, I had hoppers today at this place, and this is a really good place to have it, and here's this curry, it looks really unglamorous, but it tastes really good, believe me, go out and try it, I want to see, mostly I just want to know where these places are so I can go there and eat, but I want to see, gotukala, the sambal with the coconut, and it's actually quite delicious and very good for you. And I had never even heard of it till I went to someone's house. So that's something that I think I feel like if you were in a Western world, that would be quinoa. Like the hippies would be all over that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, we pluck this from the hills, and it's from this 100% organic coconut, and
Yeah, but that's just the way people naturally grow stuff.
Yeah, so we just need to market ourselves better. Yeah. We just need to say this is what we eat, and it is sexy, and it is it is worthy of sharing with the world, because it's fascinating to me that India is so close, and they have such a strong pride in their food culture, and I feel like it's here, and I feel like people are proud of their food, but we're not really sharing it and performing it socially. We're not Instagramming it. We're not saying, getting behind the Sri Lankan food.
And Linda, in terms of fashion, like where do you get inspiration from locally? Like the young people at AOD, like where do you see street fashion around here?
Yeah, well, at AOD, of course, like I said again, because we had this whole blank canvas scenario, right from the beginning, when we decided the kind of designer we wanted to create out of Sri Lanka, we made sure that they didn't do it, that this whole respect for the tradition as well as the respect for the modern world was balanced. So we would send our AOD young students out to the villages to look at the craft communities. So it was very much part of taking what your country had to offer, the treasures that your country had to offer, which in our case in fashion was, the traditional cottage industries, craft, plus the high-tech apparel industry as well, when you talk about fashion in Sri Lanka. So taking both of them and making that very much a part of this whole new Sri Lankan style that we were developing in this. So it was part of our core DNA right from the beginning.
Okay. So it seems like what you kind of do is you bring like a Western sensibility into, because AOD is affiliated with a UK university and so on, but then you connect that to local suppliers, partners. And if you look at places like Barefoot or Paradise Road, they've also taken like the local vernacular, but they've like connected it a bit. Do you think the next generation is capable of making those connections in this hybrid?
Yeah, I think the next generation is already doing that, and we are getting a lot of international interest as a result of it in this whole new Sri Lankan movement, because what we've done, I think, that's different to India and Bangladesh and all of that. They also have the traditional, but they've been a bit afraid to experiment, with new silhouettes, or, they stick with the whole tunic kind of shape and the traditional textile. Whereas we've just not been afraid to embrace modernity. And if you have to review those traditional textiles, then do it. So we've kind of developed a sensibility, an aesthetic that's very appealing globally. So right now, I think that's starting to happen. And I really believe that modern Sri Lankan young graduate, you've got to work on it a bit more, pushing them on the entrepreneurship side. But basically, they really have the intelligence to do that. And we are starting to see that happen. Because at AOD, what we do is we offer a UK degree. So it is an international design education. We are combining it with entrepreneurship. We are pushing entrepreneurship because it's needed in a market like this. And the whole heritage and the whole, so it's modern international design education combined with traditional crafts and stuff like that. And you're starting to see this intelligent kind of designer create something unique that the rest of the world really hasn't seen before.
So Natasha, she's talking about sort of a hybrid culture, but as essentially an expat, do you feel like we have a cosmopolitan culture where, if you go to Australia, right, if you watch MasterChef, there's people from like Indonesia. Actually, MasterChef doesn't have that many minorities. But if you, in terms of restaurants, like you'll get like, Vietnamese places, you'll get Chinese places, which are run by people or immigrants from those countries. But Sri Lanka isn't really an immigrant nation. Do you see us as having a cosmopolitan culture like that? And do you think that's necessary for a modern urban city?
Being one of the minority from very early on in my life, in Malaysia, being Chinese Indian, and then in Australia being of Asian descent, I think I've always favoured having, I think society is enriched by having people from different backgrounds and cultures and upbringings, all sort of share what they have with everyone else. What's really interesting in Sri Lanka, and what I found, is that there are lots of different cultures. There are lots of Chinese places to eat, lots of Thai places, lots of different places to eat. But I think a lot of them are struggling to cope, because from what I can understand, there's like 105% import tax on imported goods. So I think it's actually making it quite difficult for small businesses to really thrive. And I feel like if we really want to take Colombo into a city that people will say, we can go out of the city and we can experience the old, and we can be in the city and experience the new, and we can have the best of both worlds in this one tiny island that's got sort of paradise and also urban development, we really need to make it easier for small business to take off. And this is just like, even from a local perspective, if you walk down Goldface, a lot of them are selling the same kinds of food. Why is that? Are we not making it easier for them to get other kinds of food? Are we not making it easier for them to get access to clean water? And there was a big article on Monday saying, don't eat at Goldface, you'll get very sick because they use water from public toilets. I've eaten there, I think it's totally fine. But I'm getting the sense that it's not looked upon as quite favourably. And every time I go there, people seem to be having a good time, but I wonder if street food is being seen as an undesirable thing by maybe local government.
Well, have you found like a good street food culture here?
I think Colombo, it's funny, you come here and you see all this development happening, and I think it's very easy to be like, oh, it's a city, it's a bigger city than Canberra is, and why is there not a street food culture? But it's easy to forget that not that long ago there were roadblocks and people just couldn't go out to eat. So I think there is the beginnings of a street food culture, but we need to make it easier for street vendors to say, like, you know, you've got 20,000 rupees and you can still make a bit, like, it's a good way to start a business, and even for other businesses like small restaurants to take off, and we need to make it easier for them if you really want the street food culture to develop. Because I think there is all this great food, but people aren't necessarily sort of sharing it. I'm really quite interested to find out why in Goldface they all sort of sell the same things. There's 10 stalls and they all sell the same things, and I can't quite work out why.
And they're all called nanas, but
They what?
it's all nanas. There was once, it's like pilaus. There's a place called Pilaus. There was like once some like mythical pilaus that was amazing, and then everybody just like copies the name. Sri Lankans do love copying. So we talked a bit about like where Colombo is as we see it, and you guys probably know as well as we do. But maybe we could talk a bit about where Colombo could go, because even in this neighborhood we're in, if you cross the street, there's Keels is going to put up a huge development. There's a development across from the Beara, and then Slave Island, they've sort of bulldozed a bunch of Malay houses, and they're putting up another development, another separate development there. This area alone, Colombo 1, Colombo 2, in about 5 years, it'll be a lot taller, and it'll look completely different. So, I mean, Linda, you talk about sort of like a hybrid model of development, but a lot of that stuff is just like international money. They're going to put Gucci shops and stuff in like the ground floor. So in the next 5 years, do you see Sri Lanka trying to be like Singapore, or do you see it trying to be something different?
Well, as I said, I see that young professional, the one who is going to define, hopefully, the new Sri Lankan style and the whole urban landscape. Really, so that young Sri Lankan professional we seem to be creating seems to appreciate the right things. For example, if I look at our AOD graduates, young design graduates, they are going and eating at all these small joints in Colombo 4. So they appreciate the street food as much as they appreciate the junk food from the international. So there is this hybrid happening. And I feel though it's international money and all of that coming in, I don't see us being another Singapore. I think we are, not to be whatever, but I think we are a bit more rooted than that. So I don't see us, and the world has developed, so I don't see us going and being another Singapore. It's really a dated philosophy where the world is trying to be quite authentic. I think we are going to move in that direction, and there's a big movement pushing for that. So I feel there's nothing that bland that's going to be created. For example, like I said, there is going to be that edge if you look at the cultural dynamism between even that whole fast food scenario and the street food. There is that quirky mix, even if I look at the local handloom with the modern twist. So it's not about being bland, it's about giving that quirky twist that we could bring out from a culturally rich heritage like Sri Lanka with a modern twist. That then you're actually making a global contribution as well, isn't it? Because that's something that the world hasn't really had, that you can make out of this part of the world. So I really believe we are not going in the direction of Singapore, and I'd like to hope, because I mean I'm a thinker, and I play a big role in contributing to our landscape and what we are creating. So I know there are a lot of thinkers like myself as well, working with those young professionals, and hopefully we can make Colombo and Sri Lanka unique, is what I feel.
Natasha, where do you see Sri Lanka going in 5 years?
Even in the 6 months we've been here, just the development that we can see out onto the port, and you can see the cranes working every day. So I think even in 6 months they're just building, infrastructure from that point of view. But I think it's really important that young people like us stick up for what we think is cool and what we want to see in our future Colombo. Because as I was speaking to Indi before, he said all the sort of local food places around here have kind of been closed up. Were you saying that?
Well, I mean, this area, like, as stuff developed, as you got, I mean, like, around, like Golface, around Cinnamon, there just, like, isn't space for, like, kades. Like, normally if there's a working population, like, I eat every day at a place that costs, like, 150 rupees. But, I mean, their rent must be tiny. So there's always, like, some little hole in the wall. But as stuff gets more and more developed, those people, like, don't operate as much.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's what I'm worried about, that because coming out of a war and playing catch up and being like, well, we need to get somewhere quick because we need to catch up to all these places, these other people that have built quicker than us, that they will, all these little places that make a city charming and lovable and interesting and rustic will go, and then there won't be a way to put them back in because there's no space or there's no interest or and stuff like that. And for me, I will always pick the dodgy street, hole in the wall place than a fine dining restaurant, because I think if you're running that place and you've been running it for 10 years, you've been cooking the same thing for 10 years, it's probably going to be really good, as opposed to something that comes and I've eaten it and I'm not sure if I'm still hungry or not, and it's all very fancy and fine dining and white napkin. But yeah, I'm a little worried that we're going to lose some of the little places. I still see them in the further out sort of outskirts of Colombo. There's lots of places that there are lines out the door at lunchtime, and I think, God, I really need to go and eat there. But I don't see it as much Colombo.
Actually, I think they may stick around. Like, Sri Lankans, if they don't get their rice and curry, they will, like, riot. And if they and if they pay more than, like, 200 rupees, they'll also riot. So, but Linda, I'd like to talk to you about, like, what the city looks like. Because, I mean, this building we're in is, like, an old building, right? Like, the Dutch hospital, that's an old thing that we refurbished. Even Race Course, that's like an old building that we refurbished. I mean, and those buildings all have something in common. They have, like, a design language. But once we run out of old stuff to refurbish, do you think the city has a design language?
As I said, like, I think we are developing, design has a massive role to play clearly as we develop in the next, I think we've seen a lot of changes in the last 30 years or the last 20 years or so. Plus, we'll see in the future. And design, I guess, we are also constantly currently working really hard to educate people, because design is new to Sri Lanka, that from the chair you're seated to the building to the car you drive to basic things, like everything is design. There has to be, So that design has to play an important role. So again, like, as we develop, whether it's the old building restoration or whether it's the new, I think that whole aesthetic we are developing, like respect for the heritage, and also respect for the future, not to be stuck in time, but that subtle balance, that's going to be our philosophy and our design language out of Sri Lanka, I feel, no matter if you finish restoring the heritage buildings. I think that would prevail. And like I said, I'm a strong believer of this young professional. And, even you fall into that generation, Indi, and even yourself, I think, the way you're speaking, right? So I think those guys are going to hang on to those street food joints. I see it happening all the time. And I think there's a big revival of the authenticity right now, what you're doing with Yamu. You're featuring all the street food joints. I just take the Yamu app and go there on a Saturday. So I think I think we are developing our own DNA in design, and I think that's going to stay around. It's maybe a bit of an optimistic view, but that's my view.
Natasha, how do you think Colombo, like, looks? Because I guess in other cities you can walk down a certain street and, like, you can have a bunch of shops and so on. You don't really have that experience here.
But that's what makes it charming. Sri Lanka has been in everybody's must-travel destination list for 2015, and it's very much because it's currently being marketed as, the untouched paradise that's just come out of the war. But I think by not just going, let's build some shops here and let's, you can walk down the street and we're not just wholesale kind of selling out. I think Sri Lanka has still so much charm about it. It's, the people are lovely and the country is beautiful, and I think even with development, I think it's going to retain that charm. Is something you just have. You can't just be like, we'll turn, you can, but people see through that very quickly, especially travellers. But I think there's a reason that it's made everyone's must-travel list for 2015. And I say this is like Lonely Planet, because just before we moved here, everyone's suddenly like, we're coming to visit you. And I was like, haven't seen you in 5 years, but sure. But Sri Lanka has a real charm about it. And I think people who come here will see that very quickly. And I think walking down the street, and Goldface especially, is so interesting on a weekend. The guy with the monkey and the cobra, and then there's like the kites and the kids and
Well, on your blog, you talk about, when you review restaurants, you have 2 categories. Do you want to talk about that?
It actually comes from Canberra. So I have a good for Canberra index. So I'll go, Canberra's quite a small town. People will be like, oh, the food's really good. And I'll go there and it's like, it's good for Canberra. It's good because there's, only 2 other sushi restaurants in town. And so I've brought over the Canberra index to the good for Colombo index. And so it goes, is it good or is it good for Colombo? I think there's a lot of places that are well worthy of being like international standard good. And it's the ones that are actually quite charming. The ones like Cafe Japan, which is run by a lovely Japanese lady who, she says her father's Sri Lankan and her mother's Japanese. Her father was Japanese, but she said, I really miss Japanese food, and so my father thought maybe other people will too, so maybe I'll cook it in my house. And you walk in and it's like a little dining room. You've walked right into their living room, and it's good. In Australia, I would be happy to eat that. You get it, much cheaper. I think we really need to encourage the small businesses because it is so expensive to run a business here. We were at Oro 2 nights ago, and the import tax that they paid, see, their flour comes from Italy to make their pizzas. They bring in tomatoes and stuff like that. So to get these sort of places that are going to make Colombo both old and new and cosmopolitan and local, just the whole mix, we really need to make it easier for them. They can't be paying like 100% tax on stuff.
And besides the import tax, you have tax on goods, but Linda, I'd like to, you're training young professionals here, but most cities have a population of people that are from other countries who settle there, they get married, they start businesses. But Sri Lanka doesn't really have an immigration policy. Like, you can't, unless you give up your citizenship abroad, it's very difficult for you to settle down, married, start a business here. How far do you think we can develop without having immigration?
Gosh, I think I'm getting tired of my own voice.
Actually, after this, I think we're out on time, but then we have time for questions, right?
Sure.
Okay, fine.
Okay. I think that's a bit of a difficult question for me to answer as well, Indi, because I'm actually a total local girl. So basically, I think what you're talking about is, I guess,
but some of your teachers are from. Some of your teachers.
That's right. Yeah. But I mean, I haven't really come across any of them wanting to live here permanently and give up.
Nobody's fallen in love, or
they fall in love with Sri Lanka, but nobody's come and said, I really want to live. I want to give up my citizenship and come to Sri Lanka, kind of thing. And I think so far, we've managed without having that policy. And I'm really not too sure about it, which way they should go in, the government should go in. I haven't really thought about it, so I can't really give a comment on it. I'm sorry.
So, I guess at this point we'd like to open it up. Oh, there's a question.
Hi. My question is for both panelists, really. Talking about cities, what we kind of don't really address is that the experience of a city is very different based on your income. And the more money you have, the broader your range of choices to enjoy a city. And when we're talking about things like bringing in village culture and then giving it to Colombo designers, or we're talking about roti carts versus kutu at restaurants, what are kind of the ethics, or what are the things to think about when we think about the income of those things? Like, for example, if you're going into a village and you're kind of looking at their crafts and then using their crafts and bringing it back to Colombo for a Colombo audience, what are the ethics of payment there and how incomes differ?
Yeah, so basically, I think responsible buying plays a massive role in that whole thing. So basically, like, part of the whole thing is that if you keep, for example, the craft that we are working with, if you keep it in craft and handicraft, there's not going to be a big is going to buy it, you know? So it's like that subtle balance of paying a fair wage, but generating enough business that the consumer can buy, so that you can actually sustain more people. Like, you know, you can't work with 10 villagers. Like the weaving village, one of the villages I work with, we work with around 100. There's 3,000 in that village. So unless you expand the model, and so it's a case of balance all the time, you know, and like I said, responsible buying has a big role to play in it as well. Maybe Natasha, you want to add? Sorry.
Gosh, I'm going to sound really pro-free trade, but I'm well aware that the places, like, not everyone's going to be able to go out and eat pizza because cheese is imported. I mean, there's actually a really cool local guy making cheese up in Negombo, but a lot of the stuff that is different to Sri Lankan food is not going to be accessible to people in the cities, and I really wish it was, because people, I think, different cultures and backgrounds, just, it's really enriching to be part of a society that's made up of lots of different people, and you should try different things and experience all sorts of different things. And we're not going to get there if people can't experience not just food, but just lifestyle across the board in all different price points. And I'm not in any way denying that you know, coming from a higher income bracket, that we experience a really different Colombo to what other people do. But by the same token, like, I've heard stories of people who study overseas, whether it's accounting or law, and they come back and they get paid. I was hearing sort of in the vicinity of 20,000. You know, there are people who maybe they know that they can pay graduates that much because they still want to come back to Colombo, and maybe that's sort of exploiting the love of the country, and that also concerns me. But, you know, when you say you've spent 5 years studying and you come back and you can't even earn a decent wage, that is something to be concerned about. But I think as the city changes in the next sort of 5 years, I think we'll hopefully be able to work some of these things out.
I think the class issue is very real. That's like a good question. Any other questions?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, what are the geographical limits to this exploration of Colombo?
I didn't understand.
When you, in this exploration of Colombo, in terms of food and fashion, how do you define Colombo? What are the geographical limits of this? Because I think someone said that you don't see shops lining the streets. I think it's you, the Maharagama, Nugegoda. So if you include those within Colombo, then that's like a completely different Colombo in and of itself. So
Yeah.
where exactly does this exploration begin and
I'm
stop?
supposed to moderate, but I have a slight answer for that. So Colombo, if you look at it in terms of districts, technically Colombo goes from the port up. Like that's Colombo North. That has a population of about like 230,000, and that population is mostly Muslim Tamil. And like honestly, most people in Colombo South don't think of that population as like being Colombo, and they don't go there. Like most people won't go north of the port. Then there's also like a district called Timbrigasaya, which goes from here down to like Dehuela, and that's what we consider like Colombo. But then people don't really live there. They live in like Nogegoda, Dehuela, Maharagama, I mean even out to like Metro Colombo, which is about 2.3 million people. So yeah, the idea of Colombo, Metro Colombo is not what people think of as, you know, like the upper middle class Colombo. But I mean, so what are the geographical limits of Colombo for you in your head?
I never think of a city in terms of geography. I just think of it in terms of concept. And I mean, I've never really considered geography to be part of, I mean, what is Melbourne, what's not Melbourne. Sri Lanka is obviously very easy to define because, you know, there's water around us. But I think, I mean, I've never thought of the geography. I've never considered that as what, like, you being outside of this line means you are not from Colombo. You cannot identify as being Colombo. I think in general it's pretty inclusive. I don't think we'd ever say to someone, "No, you can't say you're from Colombo, you're not a Colomboite, we will not include you." So.
And Linda, what do you think? So AOD is based in Bamlapedia, which to me is sort of like central Colombo. But what do you consider the heart of Colombo, and having grown up here also?
Yeah, I think also to just add to that, I think what you also asked is in fashion and stuff like that, like sort of if you go to Maharagama or wherever,
Yeah,
how
because
much of
it's
that
like
is-
37 square kilometers, this city, as defined officially.
Yeah.
But you find that if you venture out of these districts, you have a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Like Maharagama is totally different to Colombo
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
Again, the suburbs are completely different. Dehivala is completely different
Yeah.
to the north. So it's, how do you define it, this concept? Where does it end and where does it, like,
Yeah,
what are the
that's saying,
boundaries?
yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. So what you're saying is basically, yeah, it is, and I agree with it. So basically, I don't think you need to define it. It's just it would be nice to have more of it actually in the heart of Colombo itself. But for example, like the area I work in, Bamlapedia, where AOD is, I think it's a really cool area. In a sense, it's because it's such a mix. Like you get people from all walks of life in Bamlapedia because of majestic city and all of that, all forms of dressing from all over. And also you get street food, you get the boutique hotel next to you, you get the high-rise apartment, So you get it all. But I know what you mean. It's still very separate. And still that eclectic mix hasn't really come to the heart. So I think your question is slightly there, no? Yeah.
Thank you, Dhanjay.
Thanks. It's an observation and some questions really about food. I mean, Linda's doing a great job on fashion. I think she's really putting Sri Lankan fashion on the map. I think food hasn't really got there yet, and I'm a professional expat. I've been an expat for 30 years in different countries. You can break out of the expat bubble, I think, more easily here. Events like this have got all sorts of locals. But just reflecting on food, anyway, I'll shut. For you, Indi, what do you think is the future for Sri Lankan food? I mean, from my observation, we were in Malaysia last week, a country you know very well, and people were driving to Ipoh for 2 hours and queuing up for 2 more hours just to get the best chicken rice, and the same in Penang for nasi kandar. Here, I mean, as my own experience, it's nice, but it's all pretty similar. I mean, I eat the Green Cabin near the British Council almost every week, and that's about 300 for a curry and rice. We had a big flashy dinner at Nuga Gama in the Cinnamon, and that was traditional curry and rice, and it was very nice and a bit better. And we had supper last night after Colomboscope at Upali's, and that was okay, not as good as the time it was before. But it all seems pretty similar to me. I don't know if is there a way, can the food culture of Sri Lanka evolve? Is there a way forward? Will you get food courts that we get in Southeast Asia, for example?
I mean, I think a lot of the public demand is for like, people want sort of like food courts, they want franchising, that sort of stuff will happen. But I mean, I think what Linda was talking about was a sort of like a hybrid where in terms of what they do with design, you get a hybrid between sort of like Western culture and this culture. I think that'll happen here. And I don't think we've pushed our local ingredients as far as they can go. Like, we have a vernacular culture of using certain ingredients which are honestly fascinating. Like, just the range of vegetables in this country is insane. And we don't even have despite being a Buddhist country, we don't really have a vegetarian culture. There's a young chef at Rare who's pushing Sri Lankan ingredients farther than you would think. Like, there's like a Sini Sambal and Sprats ice cream, which is surprising and like good. But they really work on like caramelizing the onions and getting like the texture just right. And he's pushing it to that degree. There's actually a Speldewinde. I don't know if you're related to him, but he does like sort of pop-up. He does pop-up dining for just like 4 people at a time. But he's also pushing in terms of obviously plating and so on. But he's taking local ingredients and he's pushing them a bit further. And if you look on like MasterChef and so on, there's an emphasis on that. They're like, okay, we have these native ingredients, or we have these things which are locally available, and pushing it. The culture right now is we're trying to sort of copy the West still, I think, a bit. So we're just like importing stuff and putting it together, and like this is like a carbonara. But in the West, they've evolved beyond that, and they take local ingredients and then they push them as far as they can go. I hope it'll go that way.
I guess I'm just going to... I'm really interested in the food here. I think there is so much potential. In how I see food development going is we cook what's there. And then the next level is we cook what's in season. And the next level is we cook what cook the best produce that we can get at any given time. And Sri Lanka has amazing produce, but we just haven't quite got to the point where we're cooking produce-driven food. So with, Sri Lanka exported crabs for many, many years, and the crabs, they have the export quality, and a lot of the time it's hard to get even here. But the produce that we get, the barramundi, all these little greens that I don't even know what they are, the gotukala, the really sort of local stuff, we need to make that knowledge accessible to people so that chefs can, whether they're international chefs or local chefs, they can take that information and sort of integrate it into their cooking style and take the ingredients further. Rare is at Uga. He's a young chef, and the food is still lots of Western technique, but with really interesting Sri Lankan ingredients. So I had something that tasted like quinoa, but it was sort of olu seeds, and I'd never had that before. They do really interesting stuff, but I think we need to I think that the chefs that are coming in just sort of need to push the boundaries a little bit, and it's hard to do because if you said, I'm going to take Sri Lankan food and I'm going to change it, you're wondering, who am I really catering to? Because the local Sri Lankans are probably going to hate it, the really traditional ones, and the Westerners are going to be like, well, I came here looking for authentic Sri Lankan food. So I think we need to, I guess, support the people that are pushing these boundaries. Rare is a really good example, but I think now that they've started doing that, I think it's always harder for the first person to start. And once that starts taking off, I think more people will follow suit. But there are some good chefs and there are some great techniques, and there are lots of people that studied cooking, I think, also overseas and have worked in some really good restaurants. So I think the food will definitely, the boundaries will start getting pushed in the next couple of years.
And I think we're done for time. So thank you very much. I'd like you guys, you should check out fashionmarket.lk. Saris are amazing and the clothes are really good. And you should check out kitchencat.com.au because she's like covering Sri Lanka now. It's very good photography, very good writing.
Can I also, my next food project will be going to Sri Lankan, like local Sri Lankan houses and learning how to cook from their amamas and their grandmothers, and I'll bring my camera. I would hopefully get a nice recipe and some photos out of it for the lovely cook. There's no point, from my perspective, there's no point in me saying to Australia, hey, let me teach you how to cook Sri Lankan food. I don't know how to cook it. Someone else will teach you, but I'll show you the step-by-step. So if there's anyone who wants to show me how to make the best chicken curry or how to make hoppers from scratch, please drop me an email, come and get a card. I would love to hear from you.